Hey all, here we are going to continue our discussion on fats and get into the classifications of fats. So, did it again, there we go. So here is a basic chart on what types of fats are in there, right? So we have our saturated fats, our unsaturated fats. We've talked about some of the basic generalities of what makes a saturated versus an unsaturated fat. So saturated fats tend to come from animals, right? And you look at like the more dense meats that are in saturated fats like beef and pork, and then a little bit lighter when you talk about like turkey and chicken, right? And those tend to be solid at room temperature. Your unsaturated fats are typically from plant sources, so nuts, avocados, olives, like those sorts of things, right? And those tend to be liquid at room temperature. You do have two like kind of subsects, like the other one is fish, right? So it actually is higher in like unsaturated fats, right? And really in the form of omega-3 fatty acids, right? Which are very good for you, a great thing for you to take in. If you're not a big fish fan or seafood fan, you should certainly look into it. Salmon is probably one of the ones that's highest in it, and they certainly sell supplements for omega-3 fatty acids if you don't eat fish, although eating the real food is always better than supplementation. The other subsect that you have are tropical oils. So probably the one that is most common, or at least the most popular, is coconut oil. Right, the other two are palm oil and then palm kernel oil. Those are plant-based, but they are saturated fats, and they're very highly saturated, and they are solid at room temperature. If you've ever went to the store and bought coconut oil, it's just like a white, oily type, like solid, right? So it does like leave residue on your hands. It does melt pretty quick. But whenever time it gets any like above room temperature, it does get turned to liquid form. But if it's cooled, it is pretty hard, right? So those are your basic classifications. Again, you have your saturated animal fats, you have your unsaturated plant fats. You have to understand that not all plants, right? Because you do have your tropical oils, right? The coconut oils and whatnot. And then fish is like another one that's like kind of in a class of its own. Kind of the definitions or some of the chemical makeup, and I don't want to get like too into chemistry here, but it is kind of like where nutrition takes you if you're pursuing this as like a future study endeavor. It's very chemistry intensive, right? But the chemical makeup, basically saturated fats are bonded with several hydrogen ions, or they're fully bonded with hydrogen ions. So you have a string of carbons, and then you have a hydrogen that pairs to each one of them. And then you have your unsaturated fats, so they're not fully bonded. And within your unsaturated, really, you have monounsaturated, and you have polyunsaturated fats. So mono means one, right? So one carbon is unbound, and then polyunsaturated fats will have like two unbonded carbon ions. And then I have atoms. I have a chart here, right? Just to kind of give you an idea. I don't know if my cursor comes up on this, but here's your string of carbons, like here's your fat, and then this is all these hydrogens associated with the carbons here along the outside. That makes it saturated. Then if you look at the one on the bottom, right, you have your fat, and then you have your string of carbons. You have a double bonded carbon here, and then you have just one hydrogen, and so it's not fully saturated with carbon bond or with hydrogen bonds. So that would make it unsaturated, right? So just kind of giving you an idea. These are schematics. You don't have to like know these in any capacity. Just kind of understand the premise of saturated versus unsaturated and what makes what. Then you also have like a third fat source, if you will, or a fourth fat source, right? Saturated, poly, unsaturated. And then you have your last one, which is like hydrogenated fat, also known as trans fat. They're man-made, so they would take an unsaturated fat like, I don't know, corn oil, something along those lines, and they would hydrogenate it or they would saturate it. So they would attach hydrogen bonds onto it. So they take a liquid and then they add whatever to it, or hydrogen to it, and then it makes it into like solid form. Why did this happen, or where did they come from? Well, like, number one, they're able to sustain like high temperatures for frying without smoking. So a lot of things are like deep fried in these things or fried up in trans fats. Certainly not good. The original reason was like, fat got this bad rap, the saturated fat, like don't eat butter, blah, blah, blah. So they came up with margarine. Well, they didn't realize that like, hey, trans fats are terrible for you. And well, now we're here where we're at with man-made fats that are not good. But it originally started with the making of margarine. It's commonly found in microwave popcorn, baked goods, right? Or like things that are on the shelf, like donuts and Twinkies and cookies and all that. And why do they use it? Well, it's cheap, right? They can keep these things so they have a long shelf life, right? So they don't go bad. When you're talking about trans fats, like, they increase your risk of heart disease exponentially, right? So there is no safe amount of trans fat that you should be eating. And you can see here, it says it lowers your HDL and raises your LDL. We'll get into like blood cholesterol in a little bit, if you haven't heard of it already. But like high density lipoproteins, or HDL, that's your good fat or good cholesterol, right? Like, it lowers the good cholesterol and then it raises your LDL, or low density lipoproteins, which is your bad cholesterol, which is related to heart disease. And then it's also linked to like several other diseases like Alzheimer's, and it can actually affect like eye deterioration and whatnot. So do not eat trans fat. Make sure you're checking those labels. All right. Thank you.